If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating narratives like this one. Your support means everything to us as we continue to bring you powerful stories that touch the heart. The rain fell in gentle drops on the mahogany casket, each one a tiny reflection of the grey sky above. Eliza Matthews stood motionless, her black dress clinging to her body as if it too were mourning. Her father's funeral should have been a quiet goodbye, a dignified farewell to the man who had shaped her entire life. Instead, it became the moment everything she believed crumbled to dust. The cemetery was filled with faces, some familiar, others she'd only seen in photographs her father kept in his study. All of them wore the same expression of solemn respect, all except one. "I have something to say," announced a voice that cut through the somber silence. Eliza's eyes darted to her sister Victoria, who had risen from her seat. In that moment, Victoria looked nothing like the sister she'd grown up with. Her face was set with determination, her eyes cold as she gripped a manila folder in her manicured hands. "He left everything to his secret family," Victoria declared, her voice steady and accusatory. "Everything we thought we knew was a lie." Murmurs rippled through the gathered mourners. Eliza felt her chest tighten, her breath catching in her throat as her sister waved the papers dramatically. "What are you talking about?" Eliza managed to whisper, but her voice was lost in the growing commotion. Next to her, she felt Nathan, her fiancé of 3 years, stiffen. His warm hand, which had been firmly holding hers throughout the service, suddenly felt cold and distant. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Of course not," Eliza replied, her eyes never leaving her sister's face. "She's lying, she has to be." But doubt had already taken root. Eliza could feel it spreading through the crowd, through Nathan, and worst of all, through herself. The memory of her father, the kind, devoted man who had raised them single-handedly after their mother's death, began to waver like a mirage. Victoria approached, thrusting the papers toward Eliza. "See for yourself. Bank statements, property deeds, even birth certificates. He had another life, another family. While we struggled, he was supporting them. Everything we thought we knew about him was a fabrication." Nathan stood abruptly, pulling his hand away from Eliza's. His face had drained of color, his eyes wide with shock and something else, betrayal. "I can't do this," he said, backing away. "I can't build a life on secrets and lies." "Nathan, please," Eliza begged, reaching for him. "We don't know if any of this is true. Don't go. Not now." But he was already turning, his tall figure retreating between the gravestones as the rain began to fall harder. Eliza wanted to run after him, but her feet remained rooted to the spot, as if the earth itself were holding her in place. She was left standing at the edge of her father's open grave, watching as her future walked away, and her past was rewritten before her eyes. The papers in Victoria's hands trembled slightly in the wind. Eliza reached for them mechanically, her mind unable to process the bombardment of emotions. Grief, betrayal, confusion, and anger swirled within her like a tempest. As she scanned the documents, the world around her faded to a dull hum. Names she didn't recognize, dates that conflicted with family vacations she remembered, financial transactions to accounts she'd never heard of. It was all there in black and white, a parallel life that existed alongside the one she thought she knew. "Why?" she asked, looking up at Victoria through tear-blurred eyes. "Why would you do this here? Today?" Victoria's face softened for just a moment, revealing a glimpse of the sister Eliza had once known. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of watching you grieve for a man who didn't deserve it." In that moment, as the rain soaked through the papers in her hands, Eliza felt something inside her break. Not just her heart, but something more fundamental. Her trust in the world, in the stability of truth, in the people she loved most. The funeral concluded in a blur of whispers and awkward condolences. Relatives and friends departed quickly, eager to escape the uncomfortable scene. Eliza remained by the grave long after everyone had gone, including Victoria, who had left with a final look that mixed triumph with something that might have been regret. As the cemetery workers began to lower the casket into the ground, Eliza watched, numb and hollow. The father being buried was a stranger now, a man with 2 lives and countless secrets. The fiancé who had promised to stand by her side forever had abandoned her at the first sign of complication. And the sister who should have been her ally had orchestrated her most painful moment. In the span of 30 minutes, Eliza Matthews had lost everything she thought was certain in her life. As she turned to leave, walking alone through the rows of silent headstones, she had no idea that this shattering was just the beginning of a much longer story. One that would take years to unfold and would change her in ways she could never imagine. 3 years passed, like a slow-moving river, carving deeper channels of solitude in Eliza's life. She had moved away from Millfield, the small town where 3 generations of Matthews had lived, to the anonymity of Boston. There, in a modest apartment overlooking a busy street, she had rebuilt some semblance of a life. Her routine was meticulously constructed to avoid the hollow spaces grief might fill. She rose early, worked late at the publishing house where she had secured a position as an editor, and filled her evenings with the words of authors who understood pain better than most. Books became her companions, fictional characters her most trusted friends. On a particularly cold November morning, Eliza sat at her kitchen table, coffee growing cold before her as she stared at an unopened envelope. The return address bore her sister's name. It was the first direct communication from Victoria since the funeral. There had been messages relayed through mutual acquaintances, legal notices regarding their father's estate, which had indeed been divided, though not as Victoria had claimed, but never anything personal. Never anything that required Eliza to confront the wound that had never properly healed. With trembling fingers, she finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, bearing just a few lines in Victoria's elegant handwriting. The papers were false. I created them because I believed they were true. I was wrong. I'm sorry. If you can ever forgive me, I'll be at Dad's bench in the park next Sunday at noon. Eliza read the note 7 times, each reading sending a different emotion coursing through her. Shock, anger, disbelief, a dangerous flicker of hope. And underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion, with the weight of carrying her resentment for so long. She crumpled the note, then smoothed it out again, placing it under a magnet on her refrigerator, where it sat like a ticking bomb for the next 5 days. On Sunday morning, Eliza found herself on a train back to Millfield, though she had promised herself 100 times she wouldn't go. The journey felt surreal, watching familiar landscapes slide past the window, each mile bringing her closer to the life she had abandoned. The park was exactly as she remembered. The large oak trees, the carefully maintained flower beds, the playground where she and Victoria had spent countless afternoons as children. And there, on the bench dedicated to their father after his retirement from the local high school, where he had taught English for 30 years, sat Victoria. She looked older, Eliza thought. Not in a bad way, but in the way people age when they've carried something heavy for too long. Her once perfectly maintained appearance was more subdued now, her designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. Her hair, which she had always colored and styled meticulously, now showed strands of premature gray. Victoria spotted her from a distance, straightening as Eliza approached. Neither spoke as Eliza sat down beside her, leaving a careful space between them. "I didn't think you'd come," Victoria finally said, her voice softer than Eliza remembered. "Neither did I," Eliza admitted. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching a group of children playing tag around the fountain. "Why did you do it?" Eliza asked eventually, the question that had haunted her for 3 years, finally finding its way into the open air. Victoria's hands twisted in her lap. I found some strange bank statements in Dad's study after he died. Regular payments to someone named Sarah Lancaster. I jumped to conclusions. I was angry and hurt, and I wanted to hurt you too. Why me? Because he loved you more, Victoria said simply. He always did. You were his favorite, his perfect daughter who could do no wrong, and I was me. Eliza felt a surge of the old anger. So you destroyed everything I had? My relationship with Nathan, my memories of Dad, my trust in our family? I didn't know Nathan would leave, Victoria said, though her words rang hollow, even to her own ears. And I truly believed the payments meant something sinister. It wasn't until later that I learned Sarah Lancaster was Dad's literary agent. He was writing a book, Eliza, a memoir about raising us after Mom died. The payments were advances and royalties. He was going to surprise us with it. The irony hit Eliza with physical force. Their father, the English teacher who had instilled in both of them a love of literature, had been secretly fulfilling his own dream of becoming an author. And that secret, so innocent and even beautiful, had been twisted into something ugly that had torn them apart. The papers I showed you, Victoria continued, I altered them. I created a narrative that wasn't there because I was so convinced of my own suspicions. By the time I learned the truth, you were gone, and my pride wouldn't let me admit what I'd done. Eliza looked at her sister, really looked at her for the first time in years. Behind the familiar features, she saw something new, regret, genuine and deep. What changed? Eliza asked. Why tell me now? Victoria reached into her bag and pulled out a book. The cover was simple, elegant, with their father's name emblazoned across the bottom, Richard Matthews. It was finally published last month, she said, handing it to Eliza. I received a copy from his agent. When I read it, I couldn't keep lying anymore. Eliza took the book, running her fingers over the embossed title, The Girls I Raised, A Father's Journey. Inside was a black and white photograph she had never seen before, her father sitting between two young girls, one dark-haired and serious, the other fair and smiling widely. Victoria and herself, captured in a moment of perfect childhood happiness. He loved us both, Eliza whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek and landing on the photograph. He did, Victoria agreed, and I destroyed that because I couldn't see past my own insecurities. See, as they sat there, two sisters on their father's bench, the chasm between them remained vast and deep. But across it, something tentative began to form. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first fragile thread of understanding. I don't know if I can ever forget what happened that day, Eliza said honestly. I don't expect you to, Victoria replied, but I hope someday you might forgive me. And as they parted ways that afternoon, Eliza, with her father's book clutched to her chest, she didn't know if reconciliation was possible. But for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that the story of her family wasn't finished yet, that perhaps there were still chapters waiting to be written. 2 more years slipped by, bringing gradual healing and cautious reconnection. Eliza had moved back to Millfield, drawn by a mixture of nostalgia and necessity. The publishing house where she worked had opened a regional office in nearby Burlington, and the opportunity to head the new branch while maintaining a comfortable distance from her past seemed like the perfect compromise. She bought a small cottage on Maple Street, just 3 blocks from the house where she had grown up. It was nothing like her childhood home, cozy rather than spacious, modern instead of traditional, but it felt right, a physical manifestation of her new beginning. Victoria remained in Millfield, working at the real estate agency their father had invested in years before. Their relationship had evolved into something neither would have predicted, not the easy closeness of their childhood, but a careful friendship built on the ruins of their past. They met for coffee every other Sunday, their conversations gradually expanding from safe, neutral topics to more personal terrain. It was during one of these coffee meetings that Victoria mentioned Nathan. He's back in town, she said, studying Eliza's face carefully. Divorced now, he took over his father's dental practice. Eliza nodded, surprised by her own lack of reaction. The name that had once sent pain shooting through her heart now felt distant, like a character from a book she had read long ago. "Are you going to reach out to him?" Victoria asked. Eliza stirred her latte thoughtfully. "I don't think so. That chapter is closed." It wasn't entirely true. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Eliza wondered what might have been if Nathan had stayed, if he had been strong enough to weather the storm with her. But those wonderings were abstract now, academic rather than emotional. "Besides," she added with a small smile, "I've met someone." Victoria's eyebrows shot up. "You have? Who?" "His name is Daniel. He's a professor at Burlington College, English literature, actually. Dad would have liked him." When do I get to meet him?" Victoria asked, a touch of the old sisterly curiosity in her voice. "Soon," Eliza promised, though she felt a familiar hesitation. Opening her life to Victoria still felt risky, like handling delicate crystal with uncertain hands. That evening, as Eliza prepared dinner for herself and Daniel, she found herself thinking about the twists and turns that had led her to this moment. The catastrophic funeral, the years of isolation, the tentative rebuilding of her life, all of it had shaped her into someone different. Someone stronger, perhaps, but also more cautious. Daniel arrived bearing flowers and a bottle of wine, his tall frame filling her small kitchen with warmth and presence. At 42, he was 10 years her senior, with laugh lines around his eyes and salt and pepper hair that he wore slightly too long. They had met at a literary festival in Burlington, bonding over a shared love of obscure Russian novelists and a mutual distaste for pretentious poetry. "You seem thoughtful tonight," he observed as they sat down to eat. Eliza smiled, appreciating his perceptiveness. "Just reflecting on life's strange pathways. Did I ever tell you about my father's book?" Daniel nodded. "The memoir, right? You mentioned he wrote it in secret." "I've been thinking about writing something myself," she admitted. "Not a memoir exactly, but something personal." "I think you should," Daniel encouraged. "You have a unique perspective, and you understand how narrative shapes our understanding of events." Their conversation flowed easily through dinner, touching on books and films, campus politics and local news. It was only when they were washing dishes side by side that Eliza broached the subject that had been on her mind all evening. "Victoria wants to meet you," she said, passing him a plate to dry. Daniel accepted the plate with a smile. "I'd like that. From everything you've told me, she sounds like an important part of your life." "She is," Eliza acknowledged. "But it's complicated." "Life usually is," he replied simply. Later that night, after Daniel had gone home with a lingering kiss at the door, Eliza sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The document she had been working on for months glowed on the screen, its title still tentative. "The Weight of Lies: A Family's Journey Through Deception and Redemption." She began to type, the words coming more easily now than they had before. Perhaps it was Daniel's encouragement, or the prospect of introducing him to Victoria, or simply the passage of time. But something had shifted. The story she was telling, her story, no longer felt like a burden she was carrying alone. It felt like something worth sharing, something that might even help others navigate their own complicated truths. As she wrote deep into the night, Eliza realized that she had reached a turning point. The past would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her completely. There was room now for new memories, new connections, new possibilities. When she finally closed her laptop and prepared for bed, Eliza felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The delicate balance of past and present, the continuing work of rebuilding trust with Victoria, the vulnerability of opening her heart to Daniel. But for the first time, she felt truly ready to face them. Spring arrived in Millfield with an explosion of color and scent. Eliza's cottage garden bloomed with daffodils and tulips. planted the previous autumn in a moment of optimism she hadn't quite believed in at the time. Now, as she sat on her porch swing watching Daniel play with 5-year-old Ethan on the small patch of lawn, that optimism felt justified. Life had settled into a rhythm she wouldn't have dared hope for 3 years ago. Her relationship with Daniel had deepened into something solid and true. Her work at the publishing house was fulfilling, and her own writing project was slowly taking shape. Even her relationship with Victoria had evolved into something resembling sisterhood again, though the easiness of their childhood bond remained elusive. Ethan's laughter rang out as Daniel pretended to be caught in the elaborate trap the boy had constructed from sticks and string. The sound warmed Eliza's heart. Ethan was Victoria's son, a nephew Eliza had barely known until recently. Born just before their father's death, he had been a toddler during the years of estrangement, and reconnecting with him had been one of the unexpected joys of reconciliation. The boy had his mother's dark hair, but their father's gentle eyes. Watching him play, Eliza often caught glimpses of a family legacy continuing despite the fractures they had endured. "Aunt Liza," Ethan called, running toward her with boundless energy. "We caught a monster. Come see." Eliza laughed, allowing herself to be pulled from the swing and led to the monster, Daniel lying dramatically on the grass, entangled in string. "My goodness," she exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. "What a fearsome creature." "We should keep him forever," Ethan declared, his small face serious. The innocent comment struck Eliza with unexpected force. Forever. Such a simple concept in a child's mind, so complicated in adult reality. She glanced at Daniel, who met her gaze with understanding in his eyes. They had been discussing marriage, cautiously circling the idea like two people approaching a beautiful but potentially dangerous animal. Daniel was patient, willing to move at her pace. But Eliza knew her hesitation was rooted in fear of building something that could be destroyed in an instant, as her engagement to Nathan had been. "Maybe we should," she replied to Ethan, holding Daniel's gaze as she spoke. Later that evening, after Victoria had picked up an exhausted Ethan, Daniel and Eliza sat on the porch swing, sharing a bottle of wine as twilight settled over the neighborhood. "I've been thinking," Eliza said, her fingers intertwined with his, "about what you asked at Christmas." Daniel's hand tightened slightly around hers. "The proposal." She nodded. "I think I'm ready to say yes." His face lit up, but he studied her carefully. "You're sure? I meant it when I said I could wait." "I'm sure," she replied, and she was. Life is too short to let fear make our decisions for us. Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, Victoria's sleek blue sedan. Eliza frowned, checking her watch. Did she forget something? Daniel wondered. Victoria emerged from the car, her movements hurried and agitated. Even from a distance, Eliza could tell something was wrong. "What is it?" she called, rising from the swing. Victoria hurried up the path, a large envelope clutched in her hands. "I found something," she said, her voice tense. "In Dad's old desk. I was finally cleaning out the last of his things from the attic, and there was a hidden compartment." Eliza felt a chill run through her. Memories of another envelope, another revelation, suddenly vivid in her mind. "What is it?" They moved inside, gathering around the kitchen table as Victoria carefully extracted the contents of the envelope, photographs, letters, and what appeared to be legal documents. "I think," Victoria said slowly, "Dad might have had another child after all." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eliza felt Daniel's hand come to rest supportively on her shoulder as she reached for the nearest photograph. It showed their father, much younger than Eliza had ever known him, with his arm around a woman she didn't recognize. They were standing in front of a cabin, both smiling broadly at the camera. The woman was visibly pregnant. "This was taken 2 years before he met Mom," Victoria explained, pointing to the date scrawled on the back of the photo. "Her name was Rebecca Winters, according to the letters. They were engaged briefly, but she broke it off and moved to California. Dad never mentioned her to anyone, as far as I can tell. Eliza examined the letters, faded blue stationery, covered in neat handwriting, postmarked from San Francisco. Most were mundane updates about life in California, but one stood out. Richard, I've thought long and hard about your request to be part of our child's life. While I appreciate your sense of responsibility, I believe a clean break is best for everyone involved. My new husband has agreed to raise the baby as his own, and I think this gives our daughter the best chance at a stable family life. I'm sorry if this causes you pain, but I hope you understand this decision comes from a place of love for our child. The letter was dated October 1985, 35 years ago. We have a half-sister, Eliza whispered, the reality of it sinking in slowly. Daniel squeezed her shoulder gently. Are you okay? Eliza looked up at him, then at Victoria, whose face reflected her own confusion and shock. I don't know, she answered honestly. Victoria spread out the remaining documents. A birth certificate for a girl named Jennifer Winters, born in San Francisco, a trust fund established in Jennifer's name that had never been claimed, and a more recent document that made Eliza's breath catch. He hired a private investigator, Victoria said, tapping the report dated just 2 months before their father's death. He was looking for her. The report was brief but informative. Jennifer Winters, now Jennifer Calloway, lived in Seattle with her husband and young son. She worked as a pediatric nurse and had no idea she was adopted. The investigator had included her address and phone number, along with a recent photograph. The woman in the photo had their father's eyes and their mother's smile, a disconcerting combination that made her both familiar and foreign. Do you think he was going to contact her? Eliza asked, studying the photograph. Victoria shook her head. I don't know. The report suggests he was just gathering information, not necessarily planning to reach out. But now we know, Daniel said quietly. The question is, what do you do with that knowledge? It was a question neither sister had an answer for. The revelation hung between them, altering once again the narrative of their family history. I accused him of having a secret family, Victoria said with bitter irony. I was wrong about the details, but in a way, I was right. This is different, Eliza insisted. He didn't abandon anyone. He tried to do the right thing, and he was denied the chance to be a father to her. They talked late into the night, examining each document, piecing together a story their father had kept hidden for decades. Daniel made coffee, then eventually excused himself to give the sisters privacy, promising to return in the morning. As dawn broke over Millfield, Eliza and Victoria sat side by side on the porch swing, physically and emotionally exhausted. What do we do now? Victoria asked, her voice hoarse from hours of discussion. Eliza looked out at her garden, where the first rays of sunlight were touching the spring blooms. I think we need to find her, she said finally. Not to disrupt her life, but because she deserves to know the truth if she wants it. And because I'd like to know my sister, all my sisters. Victoria's hand found hers in the soft morning light, squeezing gently. In that moment, they were united again in purpose. Two sisters facing an uncertain future together rather than apart. So would I, Victoria agreed softly. The discovery of Jennifer Calloway had reopened questions about their father that both had thought were settled. But this time, instead of driving them apart, the revelation had drawn them together. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family, incomplete perhaps, but healing. The Seattle rain fell in a gentle mist as Eliza and Victoria stood hesitantly on the front porch of the blue craftsman-style house. 8 months had passed since they had discovered Jennifer Calloway's existence, and 3 since they had first made contact through a carefully worded letter that explained who they were without revealing the full truth about her adoption. The correspondence that followed had been cautious on both sides, curious but guarded, as strangers feeling their way toward connection. Jennifer had been told she was adopted when she was in college, though she had never sought out her biological parents, content with the loving family who had raised her. The revelation that she had two half-sisters had been surprising but not unwelcome. Now, after months of emails and a few brief phone calls, they were meeting in person for the first time. "Are you ready?" Victoria asked, her finger hovering over the doorbell. Eliza nodded, clutching the small photo album they had brought as a gift. "As ready as I'll ever be." The door opened before Victoria could ring the bell, revealing a woman in her mid-30s with familiar eyes and an uncertain smile. Jennifer Calloway was shorter than either of them, with their father's auburn hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater, and her hands twisted nervously in front of her. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't quite believed they would. "Please come in, I've made tea." The house was warm and lived in, with toys scattered across the living room floor and family photographs covering the walls. A boy of about 7 peeked around the corner, curious about the visitors, before darting away at his mother's gentle reminder to finish his homework. "That's Noah," Jennifer explained as she led them to the kitchen. "My husband Michael is picking up our daughter Emma from her dance class. They should be home in about an hour." The kitchen was bright and airy, with large windows overlooking a small, well-tended garden. On the table, Jennifer had prepared a spread of tea, coffee, and homemade cookies that reminded Eliza painfully of their father's favorite recipe. "These look just like Dad's molasses cookies," she said without thinking. Jennifer looked startled, then pleased. "Really? They're my specialty. My adoptive father taught me to make them." The coincidence hung in the air between them, a small but significant connection that none of them could explain. They settled around the table, the conversation moving awkwardly at first, exchanging basic information about jobs and hobbies, skirting around the deeper questions that had brought them together. Jennifer spoke about her work as a pediatric nurse, her voice warming as she described her patients. Victoria shared stories about real estate, and Eliza talked about publishing and her own writing project, which had evolved to include this new chapter of their family history. It was only when they moved to the living room with fresh cups of tea that Jennifer finally addressed the elephant in the room. "So," she said, tucking her feet beneath her on the sofa, "you haven't really explained why you decided to find me now. In your letters, you mentioned your father, our father, passed away 5 years ago." Eliza and Victoria exchanged a glance, the practiced explanation they had prepared suddenly inadequate. "The truth is," Eliza began, "we only discovered your existence last year. Our father kept that part of his life very private. So private that even his daughters didn't know," Jennifer mused. "Was he that kind of man? Secretive?" "No," Victoria said firmly. "He was open and honest about everything else in his life. This was different. I think he respected your mother's wishes to keep his distance." Jennifer nodded slowly, absorbing this. "My adoptive parents told me very little about my biological family. Just that my birth mother was young and my birth father wanted to be involved but agreed to the adoption for my sake." Eliza handed her the photo album they had brought. "We thought you might like to see these. Pictures of him, of us growing up, family gatherings." Jennifer accepted the album with careful hands, opening it to the first page where a young Richard Matthews smiled up at her. "He has my eyes," she whispered. "Or I have his, I suppose." As she turned the pages, Eliza and Victoria shared stories about each photograph, Christmases and birthdays, fishing trips and school plays. They watched Jennifer's face as she absorbed this parallel life she had never known, this family that had existed without her. "He looked for you," Victoria said when Jennifer reached the end of the album. "Before he died, he hired someone to find you." Jennifer looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "He did, but he never contacted me. We don't know if he was planning to," Eliza explained. "He died before we could find out his intentions. But he knew where you were, who you had become. I like to think he was proud of you, even from a distance." Tears welled in Jennifer's eyes. "I wish I could have met him." "So do we," Victoria said softly. "For what it's worth, I think he would have loved knowing you." The front door opened, bringing a rush of cool air and the sound of excited chatter. A man's voice called out, "Jen, we're home!" A little girl of about 4 came running into the room, stopping short at the sight of strangers. She had Jennifer's auburn hair and bright, curious eyes. "Emma," Jennifer said, wiping away her tears and opening her arms to her daughter. "Come meet some new friends. These ladies they're your aunts." The simple introduction, so casually given, brought tears to Eliza's eyes. Aunts, family, the circle expanding in ways she could never have imagined 5 years ago. Michael, Jennifer's husband, entered with Noah trailing behind him. After quick introductions and explanations, the children were sent to play upstairs, leaving the adults to continue their conversation. "This is a lot to take in," Michael said, his arm protectively around Jennifer's shoulders. "Are you okay?" Jennifer nodded, looking between Eliza and Victoria with new eyes. "I think I am. It's strange, but also right somehow, like finding a missing piece I didn't know was missing." As the evening progressed, the initial awkwardness gave way to genuine connection. They shared a meal together, laughing over Noah's animated stories and Emma's precocious observations. Jennifer brought out old photo albums of her own, showing Eliza and Victoria glimpses of the life their half-sister had lived, happy, loved, complete in its own way. When it was time to leave, the goodbye was emotional, but hopeful. Plans were made for Jennifer and her family to visit Millfield in the summer, to see the town where her biological father had lived and taught, to meet Daniel and Ethan and become part of the extended family circle. In the taxi back to their hotel, Eliza and Victoria sat in contemplative silence, each processing the significance of the day. "She's happy," Victoria said finally. "He would have been glad of that." Eliza nodded, thinking of the little girl with their father's eyes and the woman who had their father's warm laugh. "Family is more complicated than I ever realized," she said. "And more resilient," Victoria added. "Despite everything, the lies, the distance, the years apart, here we are, finding our way back to each other." Day, as Seattle's lights blurred past the rain-streaked window, Eliza found herself thinking of the funeral 5 years ago, of Victoria's devastating accusation and its aftermath. By some strange alchemy, that terrible lie had eventually led them to a hidden truth, and to a sister they would never have known otherwise. Life's patterns were too intricate to fully comprehend, Eliza reflected. But sitting beside the sister she had once lost and found again, thinking of the new sister they had just begun to know, she felt a sense of completion that had eluded her for years. The late summer sun cast long shadows across Millfield Park as families gathered for the annual community picnic. 2 years had passed since Eliza and Victoria had first met Jennifer, and the initial tentative connection had blossomed into a genuine bond that continued to strengthen with time and shared experiences. Eliza spread a checkered blanket beneath the shade of an old oak tree, watching as Daniel helped 8-year-old Noah set up the kite he had brought from Seattle. Nearby, Jennifer was showing Emma how to make daisy chains, while Victoria and Michael argued good-naturedly about the proper way to grill corn on the cob at the nearby barbecue station. It was their second summer gathering as a complete family. Last year's visit had been shorter, more experimental. This year, Jennifer and her family had rented a cottage near the lake for 3 weeks, allowing for a more relaxed and thorough exploration of their newfound relationships. Ethan, now 7, came running up to Eliza, his face flushed with excitement. "Aunt Liza, can I go fly the kite with Noah and Daniel?" "Of course," she replied, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Just stay where I can see you." As he dashed off, Eliza marveled at how quickly the children had formed attachments. Cousins, who hadn't known of each other's existence 3 years ago, now shared secrets and adventures as if they had grown up together. She glanced down at the simple gold band on her left hand, still new enough to catch her attention when it caught the light. She and Daniel had married in a small ceremony the previous spring, with Victoria as her maid of honor and Jennifer reading a poem during the service. It had been a day of joy, untainted by the shadows of the past, a new beginning that honored rather than erased the journey that had brought her there. "Penny for your thoughts," said Jennifer, settling onto the blanket beside her. Emma had wandered off to join the boys with their kite, leaving a half-finished daisy chain in her wake. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Eliza replied. "How unlikely all of this seemed a few years ago." Jennifer nodded, her eyes following the children as they ran across the open field. "I've been thinking about that too. If you and Victoria hadn't found those papers, if you hadn't reached out to me, we'd all be living our separate lives, never knowing what we were missing. Do you ever regret that we disrupted your life with this revelation?" Eliza asked, a question that had lingered despite Jennifer's consistent warmth. "Not for a moment," Jennifer said firmly. "My adoptive parents gave me a wonderful childhood, and I'll always be grateful for that. But knowing where I come from, having sisters, understanding the other half of my story, it's filled in spaces I didn't even realize were empty." Victoria joined them on the blanket, distributing paper plates for the picnic lunch. "What are you two looking so serious about?" "The past," Eliza answered. "The future, how they're connected." Victoria smiled, a genuine smile that still sometimes surprised Eliza with its openness. The years had softened the edges of their relationship, building a new trust that, while different from their childhood bond, was perhaps stronger for having been tested and rebuilt. "Speaking of the future," Victoria said, lowering her voice slightly, "I have some news. I wasn't going to say anything yet, but I'm seeing someone." "Really?" Eliza leaned forward, intrigued. Victoria had remained determinedly single since her divorce from Ethan's father years ago. "Who is it?" "Robert Collins. He's new in town, took over Dr. Meyer's practice when she retired." "The pediatrician?" Jennifer asked. "Noah mentioned him after his checkup last week. He said he was cool." "High praise from an 8-year-old, Eliza teased. "How long has this been going on?" Victoria's cheeks colored slightly. "A couple of months. It's still new, but I like him. He's steady, kind, different from Mark in all the right ways." As they talked, Eliza felt a familiar wave of gratitude for these moments, ordinary conversations among sisters, sharing life's developments, both significant and small. Such simple interactions had once seemed impossibly out of reach. The afternoon unfolded with the lazy rhythm of a perfect summer day. They ate lunch on the blanket, joined by Daniel, Michael, and the children. Later, there was a 3-legged race that paired Noah with Ethan and left them both covered in grass stains and helpless with laughter. Emma convinced all 3 adults to join her in a game of tag, racing around the oak tree until they collapsed, breathless and giggling. As evening approached, bringing with it the promise of the town's fireworks display, Daniel suggested they move to the hillside for a better view. They gathered their belongings, the children helping to pack up the remains of their picnic. "Mum, can I show Noah and Emma Dad's bench before the fireworks?" Ethan asked Victoria, bouncing with excitement at being the one to share this piece of family history. Victoria hesitated, glancing at Eliza. The bench held complicated memories for both of them. It was where they had begun their tentative reconciliation, but it was also inextricably linked to the pain that had preceded it. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Eliza said, making the decision for both of them. Jennifer should see it too. They walked together through the park as twilight descended, the children running ahead while the adults followed at a more measured pace. The bench sat in a quiet corner overlooking the duck pond, its brass plaque catching the last rays of sunlight. Richard Matthews, teacher, mentor, father. The stories we tell shape the lives we lead. Jennifer ran her fingers over the inscription, her expression thoughtful. "His words." "Yes," Eliza confirmed. "He used to say it to his students at the beginning of each school year. It was his way of explaining why literature matters." "It's true though, isn't it?" Jennifer mused. "The stories we tell and the ones we believe really do shape our lives." The children had lost interest in the bench and were now trying to count the ducks settling in for the night. Michael offered to watch them, giving the sisters a moment alone. I've been thinking about that a lot while working on my book, Eliza said. How the story Victoria told at the funeral shaped 5 years of our lives, even though it wasn't true. And how discovering you reshaped everything again. Some stories are destructive, Victoria acknowledged, and some are healing. I'm sorry mine was the first kind. But look where it led us, Eliza replied, gesturing toward Jennifer, toward the children playing by the pond's edge, toward Daniel, who stood watching them with quiet contentment. Sometimes even the wrong story can take you to the right place eventually. As they stood together in the gathering dusk, 3 sisters linked by blood and circumstance and choice, Emma suddenly turned from the pond and ran toward them, her small face alight with excitement. "Mummy, Aunt Liza, Aunt Vicky," she called. "Noah found baby ducks." The simple joy in her voice, the casual use of aunt that now came so naturally to her lips, struck Eliza with unexpected force. In that moment, watching this child who shared their father's eyes, who had entered their lives through a series of both painful and beautiful revelations, Eliza felt something shift and settle within her. The past would always be there, with its complications and its losses. But so would this family they had pieced together, imperfect but resilient, expanded rather than diminished by the truths they had uncovered. As they moved toward the hillside for the fireworks, Emma slipped her small hand into Eliza's, while Ethan took Victoria's hand on one side and Noah's on the other, creating a chain of connection that stretched across generations and stories. Daniel fell into step beside Eliza, his presence steady and reassuring. "Happy?" he asked softly. Eliza looked around at this unlikely gathering. Her husband, her sisters, her nephews and niece, all brought together by a journey that had begun with a terrible lie spoken over an open grave. The weight of that lie had nearly crushed her once. Now it was simply part of a larger story, one that continued to unfold in unexpected ways. "Yes," she answered truthfully, "I am." As the first fireworks exploded overhead, painting the darkening sky with brilliant color, Eliza thought of her father. He had kept his own secrets, made his own mistakes, but in the end, his legacy wasn't the pain of those secrets or the consequences of those mistakes. It was this: 3 daughters sitting side by side on a hillside, watching their children's faces illuminated by fireworks, connected by a bond that had survived betrayal, distance, and time. The stories we tell shape the lives we lead. Her father had been right about that. But what Eliza understood now, in a way she couldn't have 5 years ago, was that stories could be rewritten, retold, reimagined, that families, like narratives, could be broken and mended, their pieces rearranged into new and stronger patterns. As the grand finale lit up the night sky, Emma leaned against Eliza's side, her small head heavy with approaching sleep. "I love our family," she murmured. "So do I," Eliza whispered back, and meant it with her whole heart. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us continue bringing you powerful narratives that touch the heart and soul. Thank you for being part of our storytelling journey.